would like to thank the Richard Pousette-Dart Foundation for celebrating the artist's life and legacy here at the Whitney Museum. I'd like to think that Richard would have liked to have had it here. I particularly want to thank Evelyn Pousette-Dart, who is right there, and I'd like you all to give Evelyn a real round of applause. What an amazing woman. I wish I had had a chance to know Richard, but every artist should have a partner in life and in work that Evelyn does. She has held the torch high for long, and she has made sure that that legacy has been seen. And she is, as many of you know, incredibly tenacious, and that's it's extraordinary talent. And Evelyn, I just want to say how much I love and care for you, and it's thanks to you that that Richard Pousette-Dart in many ways is as known to many people as he is. I would like to acknowledge Charles Duncan, who's the executive director of the foundation, who's our host this evening. Chris Pousette-Dart, who I've gotten to know. I remember him when he was a lot younger, and it's great to see how he has grown into all of this in a great tradition. I'm sorry that Joanna isn't here tonight. I gather she has the flu, but Jonathan, I'm so happy that you could be here. Richard Pousette-Dart is an artist who has had a long and profound history with the Whitney Museum. His first encounter with the Whitney probably came early through the work of his father, Nathaniel Pousette-Dart, who was an artist, a teacher, a writer who published influential books on American artists, including on Ernest Haskell, who most people don't remember anymore, Robert Henry, John Sloan, and he's straddling between American regionalism and progressive strains of art in his own interests, and with a strong awareness of the influence of so-called primitive art on modernism, Nathaniel Pousette-Dart was extremely influential in his son's development as an artist. In the mid-1930s, Nathaniel was publisher and editor of two art magazines, Art of Today and Art and Artists of Today. And in the November-December issue of Art and Artists of Today, Nathaniel contributed the piece, The Whitney Museum of American Art. It was a piece that was written shortly after its opening, and it introduced the museum to his readership. And it's actually a very cogent piece and worth reading again, because actually so many of his observations about the public role of the Whitney and its support of artists are as relevant then as they are today. At the time of the publication, Richard would have been 21 years old. He undoubtedly would have become aware of the Whitney through this article and possibly through visits with his father and discussing it. Richard's first artist exhibition show was held when he was 25 years old at the Artist Gallery in New York. A year later, he produced his tour de force, Symphony No. 1, The Transcendental, one of the very first large abstract paintings of abstract expressionism. In 1944, he exhibited at Peggy Guggenheim's Art of the Century, along with Baziotes and Stern and Pollock and Motherwell, and he had a one-person show at the gallery in 1947. And it was in 1948 that he began his long association with Betty Parsons and the Betty Parsons Gallery. Richard Pousette-Dart's debut at the Whitney would come in the 1949 annual exhibition. He exhibited a small watercolor called Ascending Dove that was painted in 1947. His work subsequently appeared in 17 annuals and biennials, as well as dozens of group exhibitions organized by the museum, including most recently in our inaugural show here at the Whitney, America is Hard to See. The Whitney held 3 one-person shows of his art, which is not something we have often done. In 1963, it presented his first retrospective that was curated by John Gordon. In 1974, James Monti curated an exhibition of 31 paintings focusing on the period between 63 and 74. And in 1998, I curated, with the great help of Evelyn and actually in Susan Hirschfield, a small exhibition called The Studio Within, which I will just give you a few glimpses of tonight. The Whitney has 5 works in its permanent collection, which together reflect the stylistic diversity of Richard's art, beginning with The Magnificent of 1950 and 51, which was acquired by the Whitney the year later in 1952. The museum established its commitment to an artist who doesn't, in purchasing this work, who doesn't always neatly fit into categories, which is, one of the challenges of his work. The heavy impasto of the surface of the magnificent gives way to this incredible ethereal sense of almost of stained glass. And somehow, it was almost a little too elegant compared to many of his contemporaries. And in many ways, even though he was in that amazing photograph, the Irascibles, that everybody now associates as being sort of the key group of abstract expressionists, somehow he was a little always on the edge of it. The Whitney continued to collect Pousette-Dart's work in the 1960s, and we acquired a great painting called Sky Presence Morning of 62 and 63, and Presence Ramapo Mist of 1969, the same years that both of those paintings were made. And more recently, two works from the 1940s have complemented these holdings. The artist's 1942 masterpiece, which was made a promised gift at the 50th anniversary of the Whitney, but was completed as a gift to the estate a few years back. And that was a painting called Within the Room, and that was the piece that actually spawned the exhibition that I worked on here. In one of his notebooks from 1987, Richard admonished, "Please don't take away my thoughts, making them into something else, then calling them me." Tonight, this esteemed group will share their thoughts about Richard. I trust he would have been pleased, but his admonishment is a plea to go back to the work itself and to discover him as it should be. So, welcome all here this evening. My pleasure to introduce Charles Duncan.
Thank you so much, Adam. It's a pleasure to celebrate the centennial Richard Pousette-Dart in the company of so many of his friends, his family, artists and scholars, young and old, members of the arts community, and those who may have found their very own individual paths to appreciating Richard Pousette-Dart. There's simply no better venue than the Whitney Museum of American Art to celebrate tonight's Richard Pousette-Dart's centennial. For it's here that the work of Richard Pousette-Dart has been most consistently and enthusiastically championed, as Adam has explained. On behalf of the Richard Pousette-Dart Foundation, I offer sincere gratitude to Adam Weinberg and his outstanding staff, not only for graciously hosting this centennial event, but for generously contributing to the very fabric of tonight's program. It is indeed an auspicious moment that we are extremely pleased to mark here. Presenting on the life, art, and character of Richard Pousette-Dart is not a simple task. Often we begin such undertakings by considering how an artist has been shaped by outside formative factors. Pousette-Dart himself once noted, quote, "It is difficult to tell what happenings influence one's growth and development most. It is not always those that stand out strongly in the memory that are the ones of vital importance in estimating future development, nor are the institutions contacted by the individual of such vital importance. It seems to me that it is the big, pure thought within the single individual who is contacting the world of reality that harbors and mothers true wisdom," end quote. These words were not written at a moment of late life reflection, but rather when Richard Pousette-Dart was only 21 years old. Fully in grasp of the aesthetic and spiritual possibilities of organic and geometric forms and how they could be harmoniously actualized within abstract compositions, his highly individual, big, pure thought was already well underway. Presently in London, at the Royal Academy, there is a major exhibition devoted to abstract expressionism. One of the most powerful paintings in the first gallery, the gallery that sets the stage chronologically and conceptually for our understanding of the rest of the exhibition, is Undulation, painted between 1941 and 1942. Pousette-Dart was younger by many years than most of his colleagues who had formed the first generation of the New York School, and Undulation underscores the advantages of his precociously well-formed, intuitive command of the language of abstraction. Pousette-Dart was not born into a house of realism, only to tear it down and refashion the rubble into abstraction. He was firmly at home there from the outset. During the early 1940s, his good friend Mark Rothko was puzzled by Pousette-Dart's inclination to work so large. Indeed, Undulation is 94 inches wide, and plus-sized paintings soon became a hallmark of American abstraction, engendering critical responses that stressed the physical relationship between artists and artworks, as well as the plastic qualities of the materials themselves. Yet Pousette-Dart often confounds such simple, sweeping generalizations. The sublime grandeur of undulation also appears in a work of the same period titled Jane on the left, a drawing only 4.5 inches square. His art then asks us to consider the relationship between the eye, the mind, and the hand, and how this informs not only painting and drawing, but sculpture and photography, a medium inextricably tied to the nature of light itself. On the left, a photograph of Betty Parsons by Pousette-Dart from 1948, an image exhibited that year in the first ever exhibition of photography in her gallery. A pacifist, a mechanical whiz kid, a vegetarian, and never one to be found drinking at the Cedar Bar, Richard Pousette-Dart's journey was a highly